What people forget is that the most unsettling moments don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with shouting or shattered glass or tabloid sirens screaming in the background. They arrive quietly. They slip through smiles. They hide inside polite laughter and carefully controlled pauses. And by the time you realize something feels off, it's already happened. The camera has already caught it. The room has already adjusted. And everyone has already moved on, except the footage. Because footage doesn't forget. It waits. For years, the conversation has been framed as noise, hatred, tabloids, manufactured outrage, as if discomfort only exists when someone is yelling. But what if that's the wrong lens? What if the moments people keep replaying aren't driven by hate at all, but by something much simpler and much harder to dismiss? Pattern recognition. Because when you strip away the music, slow the footage down, and remove the narrative protection, something else keeps surfacing. Not scandals, not meltdowns, just moments. Small ones, tight ones. Moments where the smile stays a second too long, where posture subtly shifts, where the people nearby instinctively recalibrate without being told to. The kind of moments you don't consciously notice until you've seen too many of them to ignore. It often begins with language. Names, to be exact. Names aren't just labels, they're signals. They carry identity, hierarchy, belonging. And in one seemingly casual exchange, during what was supposed to be light banter between familiar faces, that signal suddenly hardened. A name was spoken, then corrected. Not playfully, not softly. Immediately, precisely, publicly. The words themselves were harmless enough, but the delivery landed differently. It didn't invite warmth. It reset the room. Laughter hesitated. The rhythm changed. What should have been a conversational footnote became a moment of recalibration. Not because someone corrected a name, but because of how seriously the correction was enforced. Status wasn't implied. It was asserted. And that's where viewers began to lean forward, not in anger, but curiosity. Because among friends, among peers, moments like that usually dissolve. This one didn't. It closed the loop. It left something behind. A subtle confirmation of something people felt but couldn't articulate yet. That this wasn't about identity. It was about control of framing. About who leads, who follows, and who adjusts. From there, the moments didn't get louder. They got quieter, which made them harder to dismiss. At a charity polo match meant to spotlight fundraising and community effort, the choreography should have been effortless. Winners front and center. Organizers acknowledged. Everyone smiling for the cause. But when the trophies appeared and the cameras locked in, the visual hierarchy shifted. Without announcement, without explanation, someone gently moved aside. Not replaced, repositioned. And in that small movement, the entire story of the image changed. The cause faded into the background. The framing narrowed. The chairwoman complied because compliance is what keeps events running smoothly. Protocol thrives on silence. But the photograph told a different story once it went public. And people noticed, not with outrage, but with confusion. Charity optics are sensitive. When recognition drifts away from the mission, curiosity follows. Then there were the photos meant to feel intimate, relatable, grounded. Women gathering, smiles arranged to look spontaneous. But just before the camera clicked, several were asked to sit on the floor. Not for tradition, not for comfort, for composition. And composition carries meaning whether it's acknowledged or not. In many cultures, sitting lower isn't casual, it's symbolic. Hierarchy doesn't need to be announced. It just needs to be staged. The smiles stayed, but the energy shifted. Shoulders tightened, warmth thinned. The image looked perfect online. In reality, it felt managed. And that's the word that kept resurfacing. Managed. Even family moments weren't immune. A mother leaned in mid-conversation. A whisper exchanged. For less than a second, something flickered across a face. A tightening, a hardening, then immediate correction. Composure restored. Most people wouldn't have noticed it live. But replay culture notices everything. And once slowed down, the moment didn't feel accidental. It felt practiced. Not the reaction itself, but the recovery. That kind of control doesn't happen by chance. It comes from awareness of the frame at all times. Public spaces began changing too. At Wimbledon, a place defined by shared experience and tradition, sections were cleared, cameras restricted, fans redirected, not aggressively, not dramatically, just firmly enough to alter the atmosphere. The match continued. No confrontation erupted, but rows of empty seats at one of the most coveted sporting events in the world lingered longer than the score. Privacy was cited, privilege was debated, and once again, nothing exploded, but something closed. And viewers noticed how environments subtly bent. Fashion spaces, famously unforgiving, offered their own moment. A model stumbled, human, recoverable, fleeting. From the audience came laughter. Not cruel, perhaps reflexive. But when the room didn't follow, when the etiquette demanded stillness and the laughter hung alone, the contrast became unbearable. The smile faltered. Irritation flashed. Recovery followed. But the clip didn't disappear. In spaces where restraint is currency, unfiltered reaction becomes spectacle. Then there were moments that should have demanded silence. A woman sharing her HIV story.
Raw.
Unpolished.
Brave.
The kind of vulnerability that requires the room to hold still. And yet attention drifted. Bodies angled. Eyes searched for cameras. Not overtly. Just enough to feel it. The story continued, but the weight shifted. And that's what unsettled people later. Not interruption, but displacement. When empathy pauses so optics can reposition, people feel it even if they can't name it. Award shows, built on precision, revealed another fracture. An unannounced presence. A speech delivered without expectation. Applause followed because applause always does. But confusion lingered. Protocol doesn't break loudly. It bends. And bending without explanation draws attention, not admiration. Even events designed to honor others weren't spared. The Invictus Games, solemn, symbolic, deeply intentional in their visual language, offered a final, haunting image. Veterans walking, injured, dignified, and ahead of them, a smiling figure leading the frame. No rule broken, no objection raised. But symbolism doesn't need permission to speak. In spaces of honor, position matters. And once the footage circulated, viewers weren't debating intent anymore. They were watching order. By the end, the question stopped being whether any single moment was fair, or justified, or misunderstood. That question was too small. The real question was why the same tension kept appearing in entirely different rooms, cultures, and contexts. Different people. Same recalibration. Same subtle retreat by others. Same camera finding its mark. Patterns don't accuse. They reveal. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The footage doesn't argue. It doesn't editorialize. It just waits. And the next time you watch, you're not looking for scandal anymore. You're watching the room. You're watching who steps back. You're watching who the frame bends around. And that's when the story stops feeling loud and starts feeling clear. What makes patterns unsettling isn't that they shout. It's that they repeat. Quietly. Across rooms that have nothing to do with one another. Different cultures. Different expectations. Different stakes. And yet the same micro-adjustments keep happening, like the air itself is learning how to move around one person. By the time the footage reaches the Invictus Games, viewers aren't watching casually anymore. They're watching actively. They're no longer focused on speeches or outfits or headlines. They're watching spacing, order, who walks first, who follows, who the camera chooses without being instructed. Because Invictus isn't just an event, it's choreography with meaning baked into every step. Wounded veterans aren't background. They're the point. Their visibility isn't symbolic, it's sacred. So when the walking order flips, when the visual hierarchy quietly rearranges itself, it lands harder than any spoken mistake ever could. No one complains in the moment. No one breaks formation. That's what makes it powerful. Discipline absorbs the disruption. The veterans remain composed. The image, however, tells a story no one narrates out loud. And once that image circulates, it doesn't fade. It sits alongside everything else people have already seen. It joins the archive. The same thing happens during moments that should be universally understood, moments where culture, protocol, and instinct all align. National anthems are one of those moments. They don't need instructions. They don't need reminders. They come with an unspoken agreement. Stillness, restraint, respect. So when the camera finds someone smiling, animated, expressive while the anthem plays, it creates a rupture. Not a scandal, a dissonance. Especially once viewers learn more about the singer, about the weight of that performance, about what it represented beyond sound. Suddenly, the smile isn't being judged in isolation. It's being weighed against the gravity of the moment. Defenders and critics split instantly, but the clip keeps moving because tone is something people feel before they debate it. And that's the recurring theme. Tone. Nothing here is explosive enough to force accountability in real time. No one storms out. No one is publicly rebuked. That's precisely why these moments survive. They're small enough to be denied, but consistent enough to be remembered. Each one teaches the room how to behave next time, how to give space, how to yield, how to adjust before being asked. Even crowd size becomes part of the conversation. Early footage from years ago shows energy, density, excitement. Rooms packed with people leaning forward, engaged, present. Later footage feels different. Thinner, quieter, less spontaneous. Not because interest vanished overnight, but because atmosphere changes when events stop feeling shared, when access narrows, when participation feels conditional. People don't need to be told they're unwelcome to sense it. They simply stop coming with the same enthusiasm. And still, no single clip proves anything. That's the point. Proof isn't the mechanism here. Accumulation is. At fashion shows, charity events, sporting arenas, award ceremonies, and intimate conversations, the same invisible hand keeps guiding the frame. Attention slides. Priorities reorder. Other people recede, not dramatically, but efficiently, like they've learned the rules without ever seeing them written down. What's striking is how often these moments are defended as misunderstandings. Cultural differences, editing choices, bad angles, context missing. And sometimes that's true. Context always matters, but context also stacks. When every explanation requires isolation, viewers start wondering why nothing ever stands comfortably on its own. The camera, after all, is impartial in one crucial way. It doesn't know what it's supposed to feel. It records what's there. And when what's there keeps producing the same discomfort across unrelated environments, people stop blaming the lens. By the end of the compilation, something subtle has shifted in the audience. They're no longer asking, "Is this fair?" They're asking, "Why does this keep happening?" That's a much harder question to answer, because it doesn't accuse. It observes. And observation is dangerous in public life. Because once people start watching how things happen instead of what is said, the narrative protection weakens. You can argue words. You can contextualize intent. But body language, spatial dominance, sequencing, and control of environment operate below rhetoric. They register emotionally before logic steps in. That's why these clips replay. Not because they're shocking, but because they're instructive. They teach viewers how power can be exercised without force. How authority can be asserted without raising a voice. How rooms can be reshaped without confrontation. And how often politeness becomes the tool that allows it. By the time the video ends, the audience isn't left angry. They're left alert. And that's far more enduring. Because alert viewers don't need to be convinced anymore. They start noticing on their own. The next interview, the next appearance, the next photo op. They watch the background as much as the subject. They watch who stops smiling, who steps aside, who waits. And occasionally, very occasionally, they notice something else. A moment where the room doesn't adjust, where access is cut, where invitations end, where the environment pushes back instead of bending. Those moments don't last long either. But when they happen, they stand out sharply against everything that came before. That's what the next video promises. Not louder drama, Not harsher criticism, just the moments where the pattern fractures, where the choreography fails, where control doesn't fully land, and the camera keeps rolling anyway. Because once you've learned how to see the pattern, the footage doesn't feel cruel anymore. It feels clinical, clear, almost inevitable. The fairy tale music fades. The smiles remain. But now you're watching the space between them.